Hi, I'm Niall. This is NZCS Tactical Gaming's When Do We Go From Here? Season 1 Narration. On our last video, our team ended up in 1901 Chicago, standing in an alley from the headlines on a newspaper. The first annual auto show is at the Coliseum. This excites Oni, who is our team's mechanic. They see an inebriated gentleman walking up the alley who falls, passes out. They roll him. They rolled the drunk. Par for the course with this group. They took his money, and then they started looking for a place to stay. They found a small mom and pop bed and breakfast, or inn, or flop house, whatever you want to call it, that allowed them to stay there. To their surprise, the awakening had happened here already. In their timeline, the awakening had come in the mid 21st century, but now they're at the turn of the 20th century and the awakening has already happened. They realized that through their interactions that a group called Corp with a flaming sword logo was running a lot of the energy companies and such in the area. Oni went to the auto show and purchased a bus. They, through some various dealings, found out that they needed to go to the next location for their transport, which was in Morocco. They booked passage to go from where they were to New York City for the ship passage. Oni realized that he needed to sell his bus in order to recoup his money. So Oni sold his bus. He wasn't very happy that he'd lost some money on the deal because now it's a used bus. Prior to leaving Chicago, they met Nefertiti, who was a archaeology student and a blossoming magic user from North Africa, was attending university in Chicago. When they met with her, they were able to go to a little shop that apparently was owned and operated by some individuals who understood where they were from and knew what the empire was. They gathered some information and found out that they needed to go to New York City. They booked passage on the airship, and after the airship took off for its overnight journey to New York City from Chicago, our group had time to sit and relax. Kame thought this would be a good time to go out and go practice her flying. The other members of the team noted the fact that she was flying. When our group arrived in New York City, they booked passage on their next leg of the journey to Morocco on a ship. That ship wasn't going to leave for another 4 days. So they went to a hotel. Due to the exchange rate and the money that Kame had, because none of them had currency from this time, the exchange of gold was rather extreme. They were able to purchase luxury accommodations. These luxury accommodations drew attention to a couple of the party members. And while one group was out investigating and speaking with the locals, another couple of them, Bob and Crom, were exiting a hotel. And when they did, a group of strangers surrounded and took Crom prisoner, kidnapped him. And from this point, Crom had no idea where he was or what was going on. Our group, automatically assuming that this was the work of Ezerhaden, decided it was time to go investigate Corp. They learned that the EzerCorp headquarters was currently, the compound, was currently on Long Island, New York. So, having a large amount of money, they chose to simply steal an automobile. They drove down to Long Island and they tried to investigate the compound, returning with no answers to any questions they had. They returned to New York City and to the docks where the ships were going to be taking them out of the country. They boarded and they left. The trip was largely uneventful, and they made it to Morocco. The transport from the location where the ship landed to where they needed to go was necessary to employ the transportation camels and donkeys of the locals to get them there. Upon arrival at the site where they were looking for the next temple, they discovered a group of German archaeologists who were excavating in the area. Kame, talking to her group, is discovered by the head archaeologist to be speaking German. Yet everybody else was hearing her speaking in English, and suspicion is raised again. They discovered that when Kame spoke to somebody, the person she was speaking to heard in their own language. Through discussion with this archaeological group, they convinced, using Neff's academic pursuits of archaeology in Chicago, convinced them that they too were archaeology students and they were looking for a specific location within the complex that they were searching. And on the next day, they did indeed find the location of this temple in this area. The entire group simply wanted to go home. But at this point, what is home? We have two individuals now with our group that are not even from this time or place, or are from separate times and places, but they all did agree to go. And when they stepped into this area, and Varys stepped in, and the curse was activated, they were transported again to a new temple, to a church. Instantly, they discovered themselves in an old, wooden, weather-beaten church. Same layout on the floor. The symbols were all there. It was abandoned. They could see light through the walls. And when they went outside of this church, they found themselves in a rather barren area. They could see mountains in the distance. And down a dirt road, about a mile, they could see a highway. The building was sun-bleached and abandoned, looking to be something like would expect to come from the Old West, a ghost town. Our group could see what looked like giant boxes traveling up and down the highway. And when they walked out to this highway, they found a sign that told them they were 300 kilometers from the next city. They were also able to find an old sign laying at the side of the road, telling them how far they were from Seattle. The large boxes that were traveling on what seemed to be maglev technology were floating a foot above the surface of the road. The containers, box-like, look like normal shipping containers. There was no truck, no guidance, just a container floating along. Our team attempted to board and ride them Hacking into the control systems that they found, the container traveled along its way to what is now simply a district building that once was, in their time, Seattle. As they approached, they saw the 300-foot tall wall that went as far as the eye could see, north and south. There were large numbers painted onto the side of this wall, and Kame flew up to get a better view of the wall and saw that it wasn't just a wall, it was a building that went as far as the eye could see. Miles and miles of concrete, and the shipping containers were going into small openings at the base. Our group managed to hide themselves well enough to go into the container facility where these were going. Once inside, they found themselves in a dystopian future. Every individual was dressed exactly the same. Every individual had an identification tag on their shoulder that identified where they lived, what block they were in, and who they were. And the city was set up into blocks, every block exactly the same. It was a square, many floors, a central column, and that central column was used to gather sun from above to grow plants up on this column. These plants provided the food for the people of each block. It was processed, and each of them got a bouillon cube a day as their food. Our group quickly discovered that these people were working as slave labor for EzerCorp, who now ran a majority of the world. Every area had specific entities working in them. Every block had a supply for hard goods, blankets, clothing. They had food distribution, and each had its own small security contingent, as well as one area that was an information kiosk. If anybody had some difficulties, they would approach the information kiosk, scan their hand in, and ask the kiosk for information. When one of our players attempted to scan their hand in, when Bob attempted to scan his hand in, it told him access was denied. Please rescan, unidentifiable. On his second try, the machine said, second failed attempt, contacting local security. This is when the party decided to simply go another direction. When they feared being discovered by the authorities, they decided they needed to dress like the locals here. So they all went into one of the clothing shops, stealthily, invisibly, and stole clothing. They noted that the identification tags on the shoulders did match the block that they were in. And they also discovered that there was thousands and thousands of people who were living here in these blocks. And this facility was so large, the city of blocks was so large that it went from Everett to Tacoma and 5 miles in from the water of the Puget Sound. They found themselves in a giant concrete city where all of its citizens were slaves. Each day, people would get out of bed from their domiciles, their little apartments that had nothing more than a jail cell. EzerCorp was using them all as slaves for their purposes. Our people slowly tried to make their way through the city, going from block to block to block, trying to get their way to where they could get through to what they believed were the docks. They went a few floors up above one of the transition points into the quarter of the city that had trade dealings with ships from outside of EzerCorp. And as we were looking down on one of the guard checkpoints, they saw a figure swing down from a balcony above, swing through, throw something into the security checkpoint, and then swing up and out the other side onto another balcony. There was an explosion, screaming. A bomb went off at the security checkpoint. Alarms started sounding. Our group followed the figure and just barely managed to keep up with her. They found out that this was a young gnome by the name of Penny. She was part of the GLF, the Gnome Liberation Front, a group of militants that were trying to disrupt EzerCorp from the inside. She had never known life outside of this block. Our group had to wonder to themselves, what is it they did that changed things for the future to go so horribly wrong? Because they were now back where they started. This was 2087 Seattle.